All right. Answering a couple of questions about a specific unified namespace use case from a member of the community. Take zero. All right. So um, I get a lot of questions about unified namespace. So there's a lot actually about specifically about application. What do I do in this case, or what do I do in that case? And the answer oftentimes is that depends. Okay, it depends on a whole host of things. This is where solutions architecture comes in. This is why a architect who can design unified namespace is important, which is the reason we teach. This is the reason we have IIoT.university, and it's why we are passing on our knowledge to the industry, the rest of the industry. All right, so with that, I'm gonna take you through a genealogy that I did in a keynote, and then I'm actually going to answer this student's questions. All right, so I'm going to start real quick with she sent me a DM and said, "Hey, the line UDT, is it inside or at the same level of the line namespace?" And number two, for storage tanks, how are they integrated with the unified namespace, specifically storing raw materials, work in progress, and final product? And then what I have is a sketch of the process. This is a food and beverage application that is, they're getting ready to launch their implementation, and they're making some final design decisions on the UNS. And so what we've got are three areas. We have intake, we have milling, and we have packaging. Within those areas, it looks like we have one production line in intake. We have three production lines inside of milling, and we have one production line inside of packaging. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to quickly design a unified namespace for this application based on the questions that have been asked of me in a moment. But before we start, I want to show an actual application. So what we've got here is we have our unified namespace demo broker in the cloud. So the architecture here is we have KEP server running on the edge. We have Ignition. We have HiByte, and we're using HiveMQ as our MQTT broker. Okay, so currently running in our cloud application, we have HiveMQ, or HiByte is connected directly to KEP server as a connection, and then we actually have a pipeline set up that is handling one of these data operations conversions, and then we also have a flow setup that's handling the other. Okay, so right now we have enterprise, site one, area, line one, edge. We have KEP server with one topic called tags, and then all of the tags are over here on the right hand side in a big JSON. Okay, so all the tags are there, and each time a tag updates, the tags payload is being updated with the new payload, which is the hierarchy inside a KEP server plus every individual tag and the current value of that tag. So for example, ramp one, the value was 91 and now it's 88, 87, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. The second, that's the first, that's the flow we have set up. And then we also have a pipeline set up inside of HiByte that is taking the tag structure, okay, and what it's doing is it's building out the Kepware tags in a semantic hierarchy the way they are formatted inside of Kepware. So we have a statistics namespace, we have a system namespace, and we have a functions namespace, which includes each of the individual tags. And then every time a value updates for the tag, we are actually building a payload for that tag. So if I select ramp one, okay, and then I go and so if I select ramp one here, and what I can do is I can look at the payload of ramp one, okay? So a name, the model type, the timestamp, the actual topic where it's being published, and then the payload, the old one and the new one. That is the actual tag value. And we could break it down even further. So if I wanted to take a look at this, how this is actually operating, if I go and look at HiByte Intelligence Hub, and I go and I look at my connections, I have a KEP server connection, okay, that is connected to my KEP server configuration here. So if I open up my configuration, so in theory, KEP server is talking to my hardware devices on the plant floor, okay? And what I've got are, and what I care about are these simulation examples. I have simulation examples, and I have my functions inside of my KEP server namespace. So you will notice, if you take a look at simulation examples and functions, and we come back here, we have KEP server 2. We decided to pull out the simulation functions in our pipeline. So our code that is rebuilding the namespace is going KEP server 2 functions, and then we are immediately jumping to the tag and the payload with HiByte. So the way that that looks is, if I come to my pipeline and I go to my test pipeline, we're reading the simulation tags, we're transforming them into topics, we're doing a transformation again, and then we're writing them into the MQTT broker, which is, in this case, HiveMQ, which is also running on the exact same gateway. We also have Ignition running in this server as well. All right, so that's what we're seeing in our broker right now. Right now, what we have is a node that is collecting data from our edge, and it is publishing it the way that it is organized in our organization. So we have an enterprise, we have our first site, we have our area, we have our first production line, we have the edge, which originates all the edge data, and then we're actually publishing that data in two ways. The same data in KEP server is being published two different ways. One into a single tags endpoint, and the other one into a breakdown that is semantically organized, okay? But you'll notice inside of here, ramp 1, the values of these tags here. Basically what we've done is we've created an endpoint for a node that wants to consume the tags inside a KEP server in this format, right? We just basically built the payload that way. And then we've done the same thing where maybe what I want to do is I want to visualize these values into a models. I want to model them and visualize them in some way. And the best way to visualize them in Ignition, for example, is to create a JSON that contains these key value pairs that I could then map directly to a template. But the point is that I have the same data in multiple places in the namespace. And what I've done is I've created two functional endpoints. So I have edge, which is it's a semantic location. Then I have a KEP server function, and I have a KEP server 2 function. Okay. All right. So with that, I've also got my the ability. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and expand on this unified namespace. So now what we're going to do is I have another node where I want to build out some additional information about our production lines. Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's do copy this. And let's go ahead and just change the value of our digital transformation phase to 1. And what I'm going to show you is and I wish I could zoom in on this. I'm sorry. Maybe you can zoom in on it. But so what I've done is in phase 1 of a integration, what I've done now is I have, in addition to our KEP server and KEP server 2 edge nodes, which are coming from the node I just showed you that has HiByte running on it, I now, from a separate node, have published in the infeed, the outfeed, the waste, and the state for this production line. Okay, so for line 1 on the edge, I have now published in those current values. And every time I publish a 1 to phase, so every time I publish a 1 to phase, those values would update again. It's a way of simulating these data points. In addition to that, we have added in another functional namespace called MES, and underneath that we have a namespace called KPIs. If you have seen the way that we build unified namespace for applications, normally what you would see under this line 1 as a sibling to edge would be a functional namespace called line. If you took the MES bootcamp, we had a functional namespace called line. Inside of line, we had our OEE namespace. We had our, which is where the ingestion points for all the OEE calculations, plus the outputs for the OEE calculations were located, including standard rates, all that kind of stuff, where I'm not showing that on the simulation. What I'm doing is under MES, I'm just showing you KPIs that have been calculated. Our availability is 0.63. We're calculating mean time to repair, TEEP, OEE, performance, quality, availability, and mean time between failure. All right. So now what we would do is in the next phase of building out a unified namespace, in phase 1, in phase 0, what we did was we created Edge, and we dropped in KEP Server and KEP Server 2 functions from our telemetry on the plant floor. The in-feed count, the out-feed count, the waste, and the state, those are abstractions likely from sensors that are located inside of these namespaces, okay? And then the MES calculations are again, abstractions that come from these 4 data points that you need at a minimum to calculate OEE over time, and that's what's located in this function. All right, so let's go ahead and change ourselves to phase 2. So this would generally be what we build in the first 12 weeks, and then in phase 2, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do our ERP integration. So now what we've done is we've dropped in an ERP namespace that has basically 2 things. We have production order and we have inventory. Okay, so the production order contains order number, the order status, et cetera, et cetera. Again, these are all simulated data points. And then in the inventory, we're doing things like the current item number we're running on line 1, the bill of materials, and then I did was just drop in data set. Generally, the bill of materials is going to be a result set from a query that is then transformed into a JSON or a dictionary that is the payload inside of the bill of materials. So for each column, you would have, for each row, you will have a dictionary, and for each column, you'll have a key value pair. You'll have column and then cell value, okay? Item description, available quantity, reserve quantity, etc. All right, so let's go to phase 3 of building out. So after we've done our ERP integration, let's go ahead and move to phase 3, where now what we've done is we've added in some additional process variables. So right now, with our KEP Server endpoints, we have all the data points coming from the edge, all the stuff coming from our PLCs that are connected to our OPC server, even though this is all MQTT. But what we've done is in this next phase, phase 3, we have created a functional namespace called process that ostensibly is a grouping of data points coming from KEP Server. We have essentially modeled a namespace called process, and we've pulled out the various process variables that we would care about for this for our production line. So spindle speed, feed rate, tool wear, coolant temperature. This would be something that a process engineer put together and said, here are the data points that I need to group together, and I want to plot them on a screen over time. So that's what we've done here. This oftentimes would come, as the UNS is being built out and you're building visualized functions. Now what you've got are people looking at what you're building and going, oh, what I'd like to see here is, let's add these process variables in. And let me show you what I mean here. So I've got Ignition running, okay? Ignition is connected to our unified namespace. We are not building our unified namespace in Ignition at all here. In this case, Ignition is just a consumer of the unified namespace. The UNS is actually living, it is being built primarily by HiByte right now from KEP Server endpoints and connections to our manufacturing execution system, connections to our ERP system, and then it also has a connection to Snowflake, which we're using for our data warehouse and our data lake, which I won't even get into in this video. And then we have Ignition, which is just consuming the unified namespace. So I have enterprise, site, area, line, and then I have all the data points inside of, I have KEP Server, I have our process variables, okay? I've got the process variables, and the way that this works is this UNS is built out, and what would happen is I would create a new window, and that window would just be let's say it's process, okay? And then what I would do is I would just go to enterprise site area line edge process, and generally I would build a template here, but I would just go ahead and take my coolant temperature, drag it on the screen, display it as a label, okay? But generally this would be a template. It wouldn't be I'm dropping labels onto a screen. But what we're doing here is we are visualizing for the purpose of displaying these data points over time from the UNS directly. And as they update, then we see their values update here. So for example, if I go back and I rerun phase 3, which would recalculate the republish the data point. Oops. Sorry. All right, there we go. I screwed it up by writing it to process equals 3. It broke the tag inside of Ignition, which I shouldn't have done. But that's the price I pay for using a simulator, building a simulator. But the point is that what we're doing now is we're taking the grouping in these data points, and we are, and the best way to fix this is to delete and then rerun my phase, which will re-push the process, which should fix our tags. And now what we've done is I've refreshed it, edge, process, and now our coolant temperature is fixed. And if I come back here and I run it again and then go back and look, I'll have a different value. It'll update. Okay. All right. So let's go to phase 4. All right. So in phase 4, now what we've done is we've added in several additional things. So in phase 4, we start looking, perhaps we're looking at, like, say, compliance. So what our simulated manufacturing environment is ISA 88 or S88 compliant, and it is also ISO 55001 compliant, okay? So what we've done now is we have built out namespaces, okay, for our compliance data. So what we've done is we have a 55001 compliance namespace under line 1, okay, which contains all the data points that we need in order to be in compliance with ISO 55001. And then all we do is we store those in our data warehouse, and then as we need to retrieve them for compliance purposes or review purposes, we just go get them from the data warehouse. Same thing for S88, okay? Did I add? I want to make sure I didn't add any additional, maybe under, yeah. So what we've done, we also added in quality and maintenance namespaces underneath our MES topical namespace. So we added in a quality namespace and a maintenance for the CMMS namespace as well in phase 4. All right. And then in phase 5, what we've done, what we'll do for phase 5 is we will add in some additional production lines. So now line 2 is there, okay? If I open up line 2, I have all the namespaces we're talking about, MES, Edge, ERP, 55001, S88. What's not going to be in here is the Kepware namespaces. Why? Because these Kepware namespaces are unique to production line 1. Production line 2 doesn't have KepServer collecting the data, okay? And then if I go to phase 6, we will add a third production line. All right, so that's what a UNS looks like, in terms of genealogy, okay? When we're building out the genealogy of a unified namespace, that's what it looks like, okay? And if I go back to Ignition and I look at enterprise site area, line 1, line 2, line 3, all the data's there. It can all be visualized. We can use Ignition as a consumer of this data. The other thing we can do is we can consume this data, we can transform it, and then Ignition can be an edge node to publish this data back into the unified namespace if we so choose, or it could just be a pure consumer, okay? All right, so with that, that is what the genealogy of a unified namespace looks like. And I didn't go a lot into the design decisions made for, like, how did we decide what to call functions? But I'm hoping in this next piece, it becomes kind of clear how we make those decisions. All right, so what she has asked me to do is she wants to know, what does a unified namespace look like here? So I'm going to just start at the area levels. So we'll go ahead and do enterprise site, whatever the name of our company is, whatever our location is. Very oftentimes, I want to point something out here. Oftentimes, this enterprise is going to be the name of the business unit or of the company, and the site is going to be generally it's going to be the description of the location. So it's normally going to be like, let's say you're dealing with Nucor Steel here. It would be like NSAU would be the site. And that's Nucor Steel Auburn is like the identifier for Nucor Steel locate. If you were to see NSAU here, this would be Nucor Steel. And then this would actually be Nucor Steel. And then underneath Nucor Steel, you would have NSAU. And then one of the attributes under NSAU would be the business unit. So you'd have a BU, and then it would have a value, and that business unit would be rolling mill. It'd be commodity steel rolling mill, right? Under here, we're going to have our areas, okay? So we're going to start with, we'll have our intake area, we will have our milling area, and we will have our packaging area, okay? Under intake, we have one production line, all right? So we are going to have a namespace called whatever we call this. So we'll call this intake line. And then we will have, under milling, we will have, we'll do C&C line, cleaning and conditioning line. And under packaging, we're going to have, we'll have C&C line. We will have, I don't know if that says ZDU cleaning line, and we will have mill line. And then under packaging, we will just have packaging line. Now, I'm calling them packaging line and, based on these descriptions, but the actual production lines are going to be, we're generally going to get those names from the ERP system. So whatever they are referred to in the ERP is generally what we're going to put here. Or let's say they're using SAP, so the what it's called in the ERP is like a number 0088 or whatever. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do intake line, and then we might have SAP ID, and it would be equaled 0088. Okay. All right. So let me get back here. Now, one of the questions that she has is, where does the line UDT live? All right, so for each of these lines, you are going to have a functional namespace. The way we do it is we call it line. All right, and this is a function. I'm putting it in brackets, and what that means is that it serves a specific function. Our line UDT, if you took the MES bootcamp, the line UDT is a user-defined data type. It is a data structure that contains all the parameters and attributes we need for our MES function, okay? So in this case, OEE. So we're taking in feed, out feed. So if you look here, if you look at line, underneath line, we would have in feed, out feed, waste, and state. Those are the 4 data points we need. Then we would have a sub function called OEE, which would have A, Q, P, OEE. It also have standard rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So line is a function inside of the intake line. And then if I were to take the production line, for each of my production lines, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to have the same function in each of my production lines. Okay. And same thing for our packaging line. And if for example, my IIoT platform is what is doing our OEE function, then this might be a data type inside of Ignition that we've constructed. We may also, underneath this data type, have a parameter that is that the value of that parameter is a data set that comes from a SQL query. And we may do that inside of HighByte. We may do it somewhere else. Okay. All right. The other question she asked is storage tanks. How are they integrated? So what I have is in the intake area, I have a production line called intake, and it doesn't look like the line that the wheat storage silos and the wheat working silos are part of the intake line. If they are part of the intake line, let's say that the line is called intake and it has two cells. One is wheat storing silos, okay? And one is wheat working silos, and you have 3 of those silos and you have 2 of those, then they are going to fall under the intake line as a cell. Okay? So in this case, we have our line namespace that's doing, but then we would have our individual cell, which would be wheat storing silos. Okay? And then under here, you would have silo 1, silo 2, silo 3. And then we would also have wheat working silos, and you would have silo 4 and silo 5, or silo 1, silo 2. Okay, here's another way we could do this. Okay, underneath intake, you could have locations. And under locations, you could have this. Right? And then underneath silo 1, you could have product. You could have product and volume and weight. Okay. And then you would extend out the exact same thing with the remaining silos in this namespace. This piece that I just showed you here, this is there is a lesson we did in Mastermind. Let me find that lesson for you. Okay. There's a lesson we did in Mastermind. It was building namespaces. Okay. Let's see if it was August. Transformation. Managing teams. SAP. I'm looking for there's a chorus. Here we go. Let me see if maybe it was February. It was not. January. Agenda. Sorry, I probably should have looked this up, but I didn't think to look this up before. All right, so in step 20, which took place, if you're in Mastermind, in September of 2022, September 16th session, step 20, we designed a functional namespace. Okay, so let me go here and reshare my screen. We did in step 20, we did designing a functional namespace, and we did a lesson on designing functional namespaces and how to build the namespace. Okay. If you are in Mastermind, that is where you want to go look to see how I decided to, what I just did in this lesson for this student was I went through the same process that I taught in step 20, but to build these functions, okay? All right, let's see if I answered everything. Yes, storage. All right, so with that, this is a technical lesson on unified namespace. We started with essentially what UNS genealogy looks like, and then we did a design lesson on unified namespace. This was a 30-minute response to a question that came from a student in Mastermind. We're going to put this on YouTube. We do not normally put technical content on YouTube for generally it's designed for a broad audience, but in this case, we're going to go ahead and put it on YouTube, and we'll see how it's received. If there are any questions specifically on this lesson right here, is specifically on how I went about this process, okay? Because I totally riffed this. What happened was I got the DM from her maybe an hour ago, and I said, you know what, I'll just shoot a video response to answer your question because I wouldn't be able to answer it in DM. If there's anything that you feel like I missed or you want me to explain further, any questions you might have, most of the questions are going to be centered around this, okay? How do I know how to build, how do I know where to put the location? Do I put the wheat storing silos as a location in the intake area? Or do I put the wheat storing silos, do I treat them as cells in the intake production line inside the intake area? If you're asking that question, what I would say to you is this: the architect, the solutions architect will ultimately make that decision. And the process through which the architect makes that decision will be wholly based on the function of the data model, the data in the data model, and the information it is going to create that will serve the business. So in this case, a wheat storing silo, if I go back in this application here, the wheat storing silo in the intake area is actually serving two functions, okay? It is showing us the current state of our operation based on what we have in each silo and when for the intake process. It is also informing us about where our raw materials are and where our work in progress are for L3 ERP functions, okay? So what we should have is in two places, two functions. One function of location and one which is a function of process. Okay? Now, most of the time what's going to happen is one will inherit from the other. So the cell wheat storing silo is going to be inherited into the location function in the unified namespace, and then we will add attributes. Okay? Like, for example, the location function may contain a parameter about when this lot of wheat was added to this silo, and also when this lot of wheat left. That is something that we care as it relates to the ERP function of where are our assets and when, as opposed to what is in our production cell, what is the status of our production right now. So there are parameters around the function of status of our process that don't have anything to do with where are our resources and when did they get there and when did they leave. Okay. All right. With that, comment down below. This is kind of an important one for you to comment on. If this is helpful, this type of lesson on YouTube, I'd like to see it below. If not, we'll figure out a different place to put this kind of content. But for now, comment down below, like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.